My name is Jeff Herriot. I'm Secretary of the Tasmanian branch of the Institute of International Affairs. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for coming this evening to this event, which is organised jointly by the Institute and also ABC Friends. So we are appreciative of that, that association very much. Claire M. Gorman will shortly be presenting to us and then engaging us in conversation afterwards. Before I formally introduce her, though, I'd just like to note the formalities and with great respect note that we are meeting on the traditional lands of Lutruwita, the name referring to the main island of what we know as Tasmania. And I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, and also to acknowledge the great gratitude, I feel anyway, for the cultural gift that they have bestowed on us. And this is a really timely event. We commented on this earlier, Claire. The Australian government has just released what it calls its Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy. This is a response to the tumultuous circumstances we find in Asia and the Pacific, a response to the challenging demands of nation building and particularly among organisations that are in the main financially not very strong. There are three key pillars of the Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy. Claire will be going through a couple of those with us this evening. One is to invest in increasing the volume of creation and distribution of content from Australia that is relevant to audiences cross-culturally in the Pacific especially, and to some extent in parts of Asia. The second pillar is to increase the accessibility of trusted media services around the region, and I'll leave Claire to outline what the ABC is doing. And the third pillar is to help strengthen the capacity and the capability of media and media systems around the country. The media ecosystem of a country, we all know is important, but I think it's worth taking a step back briefly, given that we are living in such a media-saturated society ourselves, to really note the fundamentals of a media ecosystem, especially in a developing society. You can't deliver government services effectively in a society without a media ecosystem. Governments depend upon it. People in societies can't express voice and even attempt to hold power accountable without media services. The extent to which media operate effectively influences conditions of political stability or not, influences the rule of law, and in fact the entire operation of society. So it's with that in mind, that fundamental context, I think that we need to listen and take account of, particularly the ABC's international contribution. The second point that I think I'd like to make by way of noting the broader context is that increasingly we are recording a much greater frequency of harms in the information space, not just through broadcast and online media, whether it be cyber, the activities of state and non-state actors across the region, commercial enterprises, big tech, saboteurs, criminals, special interest advocates. It is very alarming, and I think that it's also important to realise the multiple dimensions of the challenges that apply increasingly throughout the region and in Australia, of course. Now, it's a great pleasure to welcome Claire, who's managed to get her way here from the back blocks of Sydney, which, you know, as an outpost of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, has been enjoying somewhat warmer weather than we have, but it's good that she's come to head office. Now, Claire is the head of the ABC's International Services operation. She's held that role since 2021 and therefore has been in the seat to lead the resurgence of ABC International activities after a period of almost terminal decline, but thankfully not terminal. She brings to that role a fairly rich background in media policy planning, a background at one stage in Australia's aid agency and other places. And of course, I speak as a person who went into journalism because he couldn't count. Claire, on the other hand, has an undergraduate degree in science and a master's in environmental studies, which would be dear to the heart of a number of people in this room. So without taking any more time, Claire, I invite you to do your stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff, and I'm very pleased to be here today and to be talking to you about this subject. I want to firstly acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land, the Mawinana people, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and particularly those who may watch the recording of this presentation as well. The subject tonight is the ABC in the contested Indo-Pacific information space. But before we kind of get to that discussion around the contest that's taking place in the region, I wanted to just give you a little bit of background about what's been happening in the ABC in relation to our international activities over the last sort of 5 to 6 years. It sort of provides interesting context, and I want to talk about what we have done in engaging government and the political sphere as well in explaining what we can do. Jeff talked about the Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy. We're really thrilled to see that released. I have to say we've been waiting on the release for a number of months, I guess is probably a nice way of saying it. It's up until 2019, 2020, it was difficult to get traction within the ABC in our international operations. And as we all know, with Friends of the ABC, of course, you've lobbied so strongly to government about continuing support from for the ABC. And it's fair to say under the previous government, certainly over the period in the previous decade, that the cuts to the ABC's funding and the lack of indexation really affected all parts of the organisation, and it absolutely affected our ABC international services. It's difficult to run a multi-platform media company, a media operation on the level of funding that the ABC was receiving at that time. And it's now what we call our business as usual funding, our BAU funding. It's about 11 million a year. And that 11 million a year was being used to cover an international TV service, ABC Australia, that went into 40 markets across the Indo-Pacific region. ABC Radio Australia, which had been reduced from its larger shortwave footprint to 13 transmission locations across the Pacific region and in Timor-Leste, and then also trying to invigorate a digital offer for international audiences. I came into international through a variety of different ways, if you like, of different levels, different experience that I'd had across the ABC. But I felt there was real opportunity in 2019, 2020, when I first came into international, to really amplify what we do with government and at the political level in Canberra. So, and also to elevate what we do internally within the ABC, and to elevate what we do with our, closest stakeholders in academia, within the AIIA, for example, within to think tanks who are engaged within the international affairs space. So I've worked on a plan around how to do that, how to elevate what we do, how to ready international, and then lobby for more funding for what international could do, given the really, radical change in the international landscape that happened. And I would say sort of from 2017 and a little bit beforehand onwards. In 2017, our relationships with the PRC really started to decline. There was, that increasing situation of the rising great power contest across the Indo-Pacific between China and the US, that which Australia is very, much part of because of our alliance with the US, but also in terms of what was happening across the within the subcontinent. China's island building in the South China Sea, buying ports in and building ports in Sri Lanka, the sort of dispute, if you like, or the level of disagreement between India and China, and what was happening certainly across the Pacific, and risks around the Pacific, given individual countries' at times weak governance and need for funding to be really captured by the agenda of forces that may not actually be in their best interest. So knowing that landscape, I felt that there was a real opportunity for the ABC to go to government and talk about what we could do in media. As Jeff said, there is no democracy without a free and independent media. And we know that democracy delivers the best results for the greatest number of people in countries across our globe. That idea is being undermined at the moment by some of those more populist forces, but the evidence all points to democracy being the best system for peoples across the globe. So given that context, we had over 2021 talked with the Minister of Communications and their office, with DFAT, with Department of Communications, with as they were in the coalition government and also in the opposition. We put to them what we could do in doing more content creation for, with and about peoples across the Pacific region and across Asia. We talked to them about what we could do if we had more money to increase our transmission footprint in the Pacific for ABC Radio Australia. We talked to them about what we could do if we were able to create a better television broadcast schedule and offer under ABC Australia. We talked to them about what we could do if we did more in the digital space, digital and social space, so offering content that would engage target audiences across the region. And we talked to them about what we could do in terms of supporting local media to provide a better offer for their own populations, to support civil society and to support democracy. There were willing ears within the coalition, but that discussion and the timing of all of that really kind of came to a head around late 2020, 2021. The pandemic was easing. We were able to travel a little bit more. And in 2022, I was actually sitting in a hotel in India, doing my first visit post-pandemic, talking to the Indian Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and talking to the local media and the public broadcaster there about what we might do in that territory. And the Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy was announced by then the opposition, by Labor, and it was promised that if they came into power in the May election, that they would provide 32 million over a 4-year period to the ABC to do distribution and transmission, to do content, bespoke content for target audiences, and to do more in the media development space. So it was an exciting day in New Delhi. It was about 45 degrees outside, and there was a mad scramble sort of between me there and back in Australia about, okay, right, we've got what we've been asking for. And it was a terrific feeling, to be honest, just at a personal level. So Labor came into power, the money started to flow through to us in their October budget in 2022. Again, in May 2023, we got an additional 8.5 million over a 4-year period to further increase our FM transmission. So prior to that point, we had been working on, our strategy and our approach and what we wanted to do in media. And you can see here, sort of strapline, if you like, that in ABC International, our aim is to be Australia's unique and independent voice for, with, and about the peoples and communities of our region. And we've got a mission statement that we want to be the preeminent Australian source of independent news, information and media support to the Indo-Pacific region and Australians across the globe. We conduct our work through 2 teams. That's the International Broadcast and Digital Services team and ABC International Development. And we do that because we have a charter requirement to engage internationally. And this is really important for us in what I talk to government about a lot as well, and what my director talks to government about, and the MD of the ABC talks to government about. We are the only legislated body in Australia, a Commonwealth statutory organisation, that has an international media remit. So we're there, we're ready. There's more that we can do still, and we're still in those discussions with government about that. But this is our the words that are actually within the charter statement. And they do talk about providing information and news and current affairs to Australian expats and travellers overseas. That's important, but the primary important role that we see ourselves playing is about engaging audiences across the region we need to, because for all of those reasons of really kind of engaging those audiences in a way that shows what Australia is about, that demonstrates our commitment to the region, that demonstrates that we have an interest in what is going on in those countries, that demonstrates that we are engaged in Southeast Asia, demonstrates that we are engaged in what happens across the Pacific. And it's a powerful thing doing that, creating content, working in media development work and journalism training, and actually getting the positive feedback around that. People say, it's great that you're interested in us. Thank you. We get criticism as well, that we're engaging in a bit of cultural imperialism, but we have that as our background, as well as wanting to be very careful about our approach when we make content is about, for, with, and about the people for whom that content is made. So when we've been, another thing I should say is that we started off with a very small team in our international department, and prior to that funding coming through, we really needed to ready the international team to be able to grow and amplify, to have the systems and the thinking and the culture in place to really harness funding that we were hoping would come through to us. And that is what what we were able to do because we were ready for that funding in October 2022 when it came through. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing with that new international funding. So first, in regard to ABC Australia, we've had one channel, one schedule that went out across the whole of the region. So from India and Sri Lanka in the west, 5.5 hours behind Australian Eastern Standard Time, through to Polynesia in the east, 4 hours ahead of Australian Eastern Standard Time. It's very difficult to create a service that is really going to be appealing for audiences when you're dealing with that spread of time zones. What you need to do in TV, it's linear broadcast TV, not necessarily broadcast, can be streamed, etc. But you need to be scheduling content at the time that people will be wanting to see that content at peak viewing times and so on. So we were able to split the service of ABC Australia into 2 streams, and then to curate the content and the scheduling of that service so it was better suited to those audiences in the different regions. We were able to then also invest in more content for high target audiences that were of high priority. So those high priority audiences that we think of, it's the Pacific, and this is the case across all of our content. It's the Pacific because that is a region in which we have historically had the greatest aid flow going to out of all donor countries, but also because there's I think a responsibility for us to engage with that region. There are practical reasons why you want to make sure that your near neighbours are as stable and as prosperous and as well governed as possible, because if you don't have that, the impacts flow onto your borders. So that's a sort of less, maybe a more utilitarian way of looking at it, but there's a sort of social good way of looking at it as well, is that we go to, we go to Fiji to holiday. We go to, we maybe go to Samoa to holiday. But there's more to those countries and more to those societies. And in terms of their needs are great. So we think of the Pacific as being, the highest priority in terms of what we do and in terms of content creation and in terms of our media development work that we do as well. Also Timor-Leste. Why Timor-Leste? Because we have that very strong historical connection prior to independence, of course, which has, a mix really of the way that there was negative impacts onto the people of the local people of Timor-Leste, but our involvement with Timor-Leste around the time of the independence, and then also other issues that we know have happened in the last 20 years as well. But it's a country with a lot of people and the needs are great. So that's an important territory for us. Southeast Asia, Indonesia in particular, 300 million people, one of our nearest neighbours, just above our borders, and our geography is immutable. So we sort of think about the fact that historically, Australia has often been criticised for not engaging properly with the countries of ASEAN and particularly with Indonesia. So we're really focused on trying to see how we can get that engagement through content, raise a level of understanding, and for audiences who might be seeing the content that we create about Indonesia, seeing that as being a sort of a commitment to the people in that country. That's sort of, we have South Asia as a priority as well, and the Mekong. We go to other areas, other territories across Asia as well, but that's the kind of priority ranking of them. So I'll just run through some of the content that we've done most recently, and we would do more if we had more funding. So we did a 3-part special on the Indonesian election. It had a screen component, so went out on ABC Australia, also went out on digital platforms and social platforms. We did a 6-part series on the election in India. It is up to now about a 3 million reach, which is a small amount when one thinks about the huge population within India. But we also know that that's probably reaching people who have a high degree of interest in Australia and a higher degree of education and an AB demographic, people of influence, and that's a sort of often the way that we will look at it. We've done more foreign correspondence that focus on countries and issues in our region. We've done a backroads based in Papua New Guinea. We've done landline stories across the region as well that we've been able to fund. We've funded the Pacific Local Journalism Network. So the Pacific Local Journalism Network is 6 journalists across the Pacific region who are all local journalists, all based within their own countries of origin. So we have, Lethe Mavono in Fiji. She's filing stories into our radio content for Pacific. She's filing stories into our new weekly news and current affairs show that covers Pan-Pacific issues, as are all the other journalists in that network as well. The great thing is that Australia domestically is getting more coverage of these issues across the region as well, because those journalists are now also filing stories into the 7:30 report, into the 7 p.m. news, into AM and PM. And so there's actually news from across the region being elevated through this funding of the Pacific Local Journalism Network. We've just launched an Asian News Weekly program, which is a weekly news and current affairs program that focuses on the issues across Asia. We would love to amplify that and to increase the coverage that we provide in that slot with a similar Asia local journalism network that we could fund and establish across Asia. So on ABC Radio Australia, excuse me, I'll just have a quick sip of water. On ABC Radio Australia, prior to the new funding that we received, we had a very small amount of content that we were actually creating for the Pacific audience. The majority of the content that we ran on ABC Radio Australia, going out on those 13 transmission sites, was content that we harvested from other radio networks that the ABC ran. Since with the new funding, we've been able to bring on a big team of Pacific of journalists with Pacific heritage, a high degree of Pacific cultural knowledge, and a great level of interest in issues across the Pacific. And we now have really from 6 a.m. in the morning through till later in the afternoon, a schedule that's built and filled around providing content that actually has real relevance and interest and is designed for audiences across the Pacific. And we're doing science, we're doing culture, we're doing arts, we're doing news and current affairs, we're doing sport, we're doing religion, we're doing music. We are, with that additional funding also, so from 13 original transmitters, we have now got another 6 on board across the region and another 6 to come in the next few months. So really virtually doubled our footprint and our network, which is a really exciting thing. In our international development space, we have launched an online learning platform which houses the really rich level of content that we've got in training and media capacity building and so on. That is then used in our training programs across the Indo-Pacific region. We've got a Timor-Leste media development program which works with RTTL, which is the Timor-Leste public broadcaster, and has supported them to launch an English language news program which goes out weekly. That support for the launch and developing the program and then supporting it in an ongoing way is an ongoing part of that project, but we also work with other parts of the Timor-Leste media sector with providing journalism training and providing support. We've got an Indonesia media development program that focuses on digital storytelling skills and cyber safety, particularly in relation to women journalists and content makers. So that project is really gaining traction now. And from there was perhaps a level of uncertainty within Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade about how successful the ABC would be in getting traction within the Indonesian media market. But the way that we work and our approach, our philosophy for developing media development projects and interventions is really about listening and learning. It's all about being partner-led. So we've got a great team of people within our international development area who are very skilled at going into a market, making connections, learning from the market, understanding what value add that we can provide. We don't go into any market in any of our development work and say, this is what, we think you need this, so this is what we will be providing. It's a very old school, old style of working, and one that it's not the philosophies that we use. So lots of exciting work under that Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy monies. I suppose another couple of things that I'll just mention quickly around our approach and how we work. Our international relations for the ABC was not something that was funded or really considered as part of the kind of overall corporate remit for a number of years. It was very much, I think, at the time when Jeff was in the corporate affairs area of the ABC. We've been really focused on making sure that we engage really robustly in our region through our broadcasting union. So the Asia-Pacific has the Asia-Pacific Broadcasting Union, the ABU. It's the largest broadcasting union in the world. It's got approximately 260 members at different levels of membership, not all at the top level of membership. And the ABC was a founding member of the ABU along with NHK Japan back in 1964. So the previous head of international very astutely decided, we had left the ABU. He very astutely decided to rejoin the ABU, I think in 2019. And since then, we've been really engaging strongly and robustly with the ABU matters. It's what our approach is in that union is really to champion public interest media and best standards of objective journalism. Our region is so mixed in terms of government support and regulation for free and independent media. We see that there's a really important role for us to play, and one that we play in concert with some of our key allies, if you like, within that space. So NHK Japan, KBS Korea, and others as well, some in the Pacific as well, who are very strong on media and independence, to support one another, to support the idea of best practice objective standards of journalism. And one of the things that's often really interesting is meeting journalists within that forum who are in public broadcasters or public interest media organisations in their home country. They're committed to the idea of independence, but they're not able to engage and create content and to run media organisations in that way. So alongside of that international relations work, we also have a Memorandum of Understanding program. That program covers the work that we do in the broadcast space and in our international development work, our media capacity work. And so we have memorandums of understanding as frameworks for our cooperation and collaboration with NBC in Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands Broadcasting Corporation, Vanuatu Broadcasting and Television Corporation, Tonga Broadcasting Commission, Fiji Broadcasting Corporation, RTTL in Timor-Leste, TVRI in Indonesia. We've got one under development with RRI in Indonesia. That's the radio state broadcaster in Indonesia. and we've got Tuvalu, TVBC. We do see that there is, China is very muscular in going out and making those sorts of arrangements with media across the region. This is important to us as we see it as an ability. It gives us a framework with which to sort of stand alongside some of our partner broadcasters across the region. And I'll finish just on this point and we can move to questions. But one of the things that I think it's important for us to consider in the ABC is that particularly in the Pacific region, we are the largest, best funded public broadcaster from the largest country in the region. New Zealand does a great job. TVNZ does a great job. TVNZ does a great job domestically. RNZ run a Pacific service, but they're quite small. They're not as well funded as we are. Their population is 5 to 6 million overall. So we have a responsibility as the largest public sector broadcaster, public interest media organisation in the region to engage with broadcasters and with media across the region and engage in a way that is respectful, not imperialist in any way, shape or form, but seeing what we can do in partnership. When we were doing those MOU arrangements with our partner broadcasters, we often talk about this is about two-way exchange. It's not just about us coming along and joining arms with you and we march off merrily into the future. This is really, we get rewards from these arrangements as well. And those rewards is a richer understanding of people and cultures and the politics and the issues affecting people across the region. And so many of them are existential particularly for our Pacific region. I'll finish there and very happy to answer questions that you might have or talk a little bit more about our philosophy and approach and perhaps also that contested nature of the region. Jeff, if you don't feel like I've covered that quite extensively enough.
Blair, thank you very much. Something occurred to me as you were speaking about the for and with and the collaboration and the increased engagement of people from the region. There's an American journalist, scholar, Philip Sieb, wrote something memorable a while ago. He said, talking about this cross-cultural communication, he said that the issue is not so much for these audiences acknowledgement of Western standards of objectivity, but rather that they perceive that they are seeing their news through their eyes. Now, the programs you're talking about, of course, are broader than news and information, but it's a quote that keeps recurring to me because of that need to engage, establish a sense of a shared experience. Only through that can you politically predispose people towards being influenced or attracted. So you've talked about the way in which you're engaging staff, but I wonder whether you could unbundle just a little bit more the how. The how is it that you manage to establish through those relationships that sense of shared experience?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jeff. I mean, I think the Charter Statement is asking of us to broadcast programs of news, current affairs, entertainment and cultural enrichment that will encourage awareness of Australia and an international understanding of Australian attitudes on world affairs. We can't do any of that without engaging the audience first in things that are of interest and front of mind and that compel them to watch our content or to read our content or to listen to our content. So it's important for us to have a kind of really holistic approach to those audiences and think about, to be driven by, this is a great thing about working with journalists, right, is a journalist and content makers' role is really to work out what the issues are, if it's in news and current affairs, what the news agenda is, what's topical at the moment, and to present it in a way that's engaging to the audience with that overlay of editorial standards, objectivity, impartiality, and so on. So the way that we have approached that and have approached building content teams is we have looked at, in particular, the skills and the skills availability within diaspora communities, particularly Pacific diaspora communities within Australia, and see where we can harness those and to utilise that deep cultural knowledge from lived experience in creating content. Now, when we can't do that, which is often because, we're still working to, we've got a number of initiatives that we are undertaking to develop more skilled journalists and content makers, say, from within the Pacific diaspora. But where we can't do that, we can go into country and work with local partners to get a better read on what to do and how to understand what's going on in country. And I'm looking at Dan, who's sitting up here. He's a colleague. He's our deputy digital editor for in our digital team for international. And we were recently just in Tuvalu, and we were launching the FM transmission service in Tuvalu. Dan was doing some content creation while we were there as well. And he wanted to, and the team wanted to develop a bit of a series around the Falapili Union and what it meant for people within Tuvalu. The Falapili Union is the union that's not quite signed yet, but under which there will be a migration route for people from Tuvalu to come to Australia. Tuvalu's got a small population. There's lots of issues to unpack with it. Do people in Tuvalu actually want to come to Australia? All of those sorts of things. So on the ground, we engaged a local TV film person, I should say, and she's an experienced journalist within Tuvalu. And so Dan and Wasezi worked side by side for the time that they're there. So we also, while I was there, I spent time with the Tuvalu Broadcasting Corporation to talk about what those issues are that they face, what are their challenges, what are their wins, what's happening. We develop relationships. They're all really important in terms of really engaging and getting that kind of richness in what you are trying to do in terms of content, in terms of your sort of international relations, in terms of, feeding that back into the ABC and into the way that we work.
Thank you very much. Now, we'd love to get some questions and discussion from the audience. And we have
roving mic.
The roving mic. So I shall try to, Bruno. Thank you. Could anyone like to kick off? Peter. Yeah.
It's quite impressive, Claire, that the building up and rebuilding of relationships that haven't existed for quite a while, particularly in the Pacific, and the loss that's caused to communication. And then I was thinking about, I worked over there for a few years myself, and relationships are everything. But, as an ABC broadcaster, sometimes we notice things which maybe not in the interest of Australia or not interested in political. And that tightrope of how you manage moving from that relationship to risking the relationship, how are you playing that?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I mean, our relationships that we're building, I should say that particularly in the Pacific space, that our international development team have had a continuity of relationships across the Pacific region, particularly, well, under PACMAS, which is an umbrella Pacific Australia Pacific Media Assistance Scheme, and particularly Media Development Initiative that my colleague Rob Batten works very closely on, that is focused on PNG. Those relationships have been established and nurtured within that at that level of work, and they were extant in the ABC. So with our increase in funding, we've been able to build on those definitely, and sort of reach out further. But look, the thing that we always need to remember, I think, and this is our great strength, is that we model what independent public media can do in a country. This is in the ABC, right, and in Australia. When we hold power to account, it doesn't mean that the government dissolves the next day. It means that actions are taken. We have a commission or we have an inquiry, and policy gets changed, and the legislative agenda gets changed, or the regulations get changed, and we try to, generally speaking, there's a level of improvement in our governance. And that's what often we're kind of talking about, when we're, say, I mean, in some of the smaller Pacific markets in particular, there can be difficulty for local journalists and local media houses to tell stories about corruption or, malpractice or, those sorts of things that we would do, I would say with ease in Australia, but it's easier in Australia because you're not related to the minister that's in charge, and you're not, that minister is also not the one that is signing off on the advertising that's going to go out on your platform, which forms the financial sustainability of your operation. So what the ABC can do internationally in that context is sometimes break stories that then enable local media to pick them up and continue on that exposition of what the issue is. So, yeah, I think, did I answer your question? Good. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I don't think the mission statement is anywhere near as sound and as deep as your own vision. That mission statement is very much centred on Australia's interests, and your own vision is much deeper than that. And I think I compliment you on that, but it's really quite noticeable that friendship is a little bit more than acting in our own interest. It's really quite encouraging to hear what you're saying. That's really all I want to say.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Claire, two questions. One is, given that funding has been restored and that's all good and we're on a positive path, how do you kind of build and protect, the legacy of what you're creating now, so it's not subject to the vagaries of another, government that decides this is not what's important to them? And, is there any kind of lessons that have been learnt from the previous kind of experience?
Yep.
And I guess my second one, it might be outside your scope, but ABC International, I know maybe not so much the Asia Pacific, but I know some of us sometimes look at SBS International Affairs and feel that we're much more informed by what's going on in the world, more broadly, more in depth covers more countries than the ABC often give us kind of an eye into. Thank you.
Thank you. Both really good questions. So in terms of protecting the legacy, it's about continuing those conversations and proving our concept and proving that what we do works, and then communicating that to government at a political level and at the bureaucratic level, and also communicating that and in continuing the engagement with the opposition. So I had a meeting last week with Michael McCormack, who's the Shadow Minister for the Pacific and International Development. And we talked about what we do and, you know, I gave him an update. So it's about continuing on that dialogue. It's also important to, I've always seen it, and I absolutely have learned from some of the lessons from sort of the late noughties through to the cutoff of shortwave and what happened with international in the last part of the decade, of just how it's so important to elevate what we do in international internally in the ABC. So there's buy-in from all levels. So there's real, like, you know, our focus as the senior managers in the team is about communicating what we do. We're not quiet about what we do at all. We're very open. We're very transparent. We don't give anybody the willies because they think, oh my goodness, what are they doing in terms of taking Swiss vitamins sponsorship to support the digital product that we're using that's internationally facing. We're very careful about that trust and engagement across the ABC at all levels. And we do a lot of internal communications around that and around making sure that people across the ABC know what we're doing and they're quite enthused by it. That's kind of the idea of it. You know, and it's also about doing these sorts of things, like getting out and talking to friends of the ABC, AIIA, people within communities, and elevating what we do internationally. You know, Radio Australia didn't stop in 2017. We're still going, and now we've got this great new service that you can listen to actually on the ABC Listen app. Download it now, and if you're interested in Pacific affairs, you cannot go wrong listening to Pacific Beat 5 days a week, or catch up on a Saturday with Pacific Review, half an hour of the major stories of the region. Follow ABC Pacific Facebook and have a look at ABC Pacific. We've got ABC Asia. So it's about kind of getting out what we do at lots of different levels, government, the general population. In terms of international news coverage, I think it was really interesting during the pandemic. Period highlighted a lot, you know, put a focus a lot onto a lot of different things. It gave a lens through which you could look at certainly the coverage that the Australian media gave, what was happening in Europe and the UK and the Americas versus what was happening in relation to pandemic and lockdowns and vaccine uptakes and so on across our part of the globe. And there was a lot of commentary around that time of that coverage of the pandemic was emblematic of the focus that we still have within Australia on the Anglosphere, on the Western Hemisphere, and not on our own region. Now, I would argue that we absolutely need to have a greater level of coverage coming in from across all of the Indo-Pacific, from South Asia. China is a difficult one for us at the moment because we can't have a foreign correspondent. We haven't got the ability to have a foreign correspondent or more than one foreign correspondent too within China and across the region more broadly. You know, we've got one correspondent in Indonesia. It's a country of 300 million people right on our doorstep. So our idea of wanting to have more funding to fund the Asian local journalism network is about trying to shift some of that balance and expand out our coverage that we then take back into the region, but that will also work in the same way which the Pacific Local Journalism Network has worked in covering Pacific issues and bringing them back to a domestic audience. I mean, this is sort of a bit, it's the bigger vision really, but when we're making content decisions and decisions around our, you know, what we will bid for in terms of media development work and what we will do in terms of distribution and transmission and so on, the decision-making rubric is first international. What will this do for our international audiences? And then secondly, there's an element of like, well, what can this bring back to Australia? What can this bring back to a domestic audience? And I think that's a really powerful thing for us to kind of talk about too to government, because it's in our national interest for Australians to be more engaged with the region, to understand better what the issues are across the region, and to have that commitment to engaging well, robustly, respectfully with that region. We can't do that unless we know more about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claire. You mentioned that there's a correspondent in Indonesia and he's doing a marvelous job.
Absolutely.
People ask me, when will the ABC have a correspondent in Beijing? And I say, unlikely in the current environment, but you're in the know. So what's your answer?
Look, we have been engaging with the Chinese Communist Party since 2020, August 2020, when Bill Birtles left Beijing under difficult circumstances. We've had a number of different representations at embassies and so on. So there is absolutely appetite for us to go back in. We cannot provide the kind of coverage that we need of China's massively important country to us, to our future, to what's happening across the globe. And it's very frustrating, I know, for our colleagues in news. So I suppose the best I can say is that it's a very live issue and we're working really hard to try and resolve it. And we're talking to our government as well about if there is potential for support from them to enable us to have a correspondent back in Beijing, and maybe more than one correspondent in Beijing too. Correspondent in Beijing, Shanghai, Chengdu, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Yeah.
Claire, thank you very much. And thank you all. Time has escaped.